Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns market report for this morning. It's September 28th, 2022. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. Now, I know many of you have asked and are worried about what's going on with the Hurricane Ian. Unfortunately, for the people of Fort Myers, they're going to get crushed. This is pushed far south of me to the point where I'm not even sure we're going to get tropical storm force winds. Whereas, 2 days ago, it was looking like we were going to get hit dead on. Now, I'm going to tell you that where I am in North Florida it's extremely unlikely we can ever get hit with the full force of the storm. It has to be a literal perfect set of events. And invariably, storm tracks that have said, that, early on, 3 days out, say, oh, yep, this, Cedar Key and whatnot are going to get hit, which is north of Tampa, going to get hit directly, and then it invariably either goes to Tampa or goes to the Panhandle. It's just the way things work out. We're actually quite safe. We usually get hit with the backside of storms. If it hits the Panhandle, we get some of the front side of the storm, and those are usually the most dangerous. But as it stands, hopefully we won't even lose power, but I am preparing for that. So I'm trying to get this out the door as quickly as possible this morning and get all of my needed things done so that if I'm without power through the end of the month, I'm not missing any of my deadlines. But if I'm offline for a couple of days, it's not because I have information leading to the arrest of Hillary Clinton. It's simply because there's a hurricane. All right, let's get started. I want to talk about, and most of what I'm talking about this morning is the situation with Nord Stream 1 and 2 and the bombing. Okay, and I've been out on Twitter. I went out on Twitter last night. I started asking questions and trying to lead people to get off of the pat answer that the U.S. bombed the pipelines because, all of a sudden, after we've prepped a narrative for 3 months that the U.S. is, trying to keep the Germans under control and keep them a vassal state, then the Americans immediately come out and do the very thing that would ensure that Germany has to remain a vassal state. As I have told you many, 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 many times, the Germans are not a victim here. The Germans are the direct beneficiary of everything the EU was architected to become. And the destruction and the deindustrialization of Germany is part of that strategy, because they want to rebuild Germany under a different architecture and a different rubric. And they want to use, and effectively they have used, German political complacency and confusion as a means by which to get this done. The Germans have, like Americans, are the fat and happy versions of folks in Europe. They have lived high on the hog, far in excess of their actual place in the world, because of the internal mercantilism of a euro that is too strong for the rest of Europe, but too weak relative to Germany. Okay, it's in many ways similar to the way California has done the same thing to the United States, having one single currency with vastly different economies from state to state. It allows California and New York, and they should be running with currencies that are far stronger, or at least interest rates that are far stronger than the United States. The cost of capital in the U.S. in those areas should be different than the cost of capital in Mississippi, right? And this goes into Martin Armstrong's argument that the original conception of the Fed being 12 regional banks with 12 regional interest rates and not one monolithic interest rate is part of the reason why the Fed has become what it's become. Now, it's a globalist institution. So we have the same problem here in the U.S., and I have some initial thoughts about how we get out of that and what is going on here, but I'm not going to present those today because I want to talk about what's going on with Nord Stream 2 and Nord Streams 1 and 2 and this bombing. Because the truth of the matter is that I could sit here for the next 20 minutes and spin out scenarios, and I just might, about who benefit, about each one of the players involved and who would benefit from this. So from the United States perspective, clearly, if it's a monolith. If the United States is a monolith trying to destroy European competitiveness and keep the Germans and remove the concept of Germany backsliding and cutting a deal with the Russians to have some energy in 2023 and beyond, then bombing Nord Stream 1 and 2 makes sense. They benefit from this. I think it's too pat an answer, frankly, but it's a strategy, and I'm sure that it's discussed in those terms by the neoconservatives, who I still consider as useful idiots for Davos. You have to understand that I think of them as the shock troops that run around doing all this stupid stuff and thinking that they're in charge, but they're really not in charge. I mean, they've been let loose because of, in both the US and the UK, and in Germany, because there's been power vacuums created by these weak governments that have been put in place and all the political turmoil. So the changing of the guard in the UK, the collapse of the Boris Johnson government, the obvious decline of the Queen over the last 3 or 4 months until she finally died, the putting in a weak coalition in Germany that's actually run by the Greens, which are clearly in the tank for Davos, and then of course the Biden junta that is and the vandals there. All of these people are vandals to different degrees now, but at the same time they all have a hate on for the Russians that is both cultural, genetic, and historic. And therefore, activating these people and just letting them run hog wild and while at the same time promoting at every level, in the zeitgeist, the Peter Zahans of the world, to say, oh, look, it's working. And then to keep everybody confused as to what's going on, and then is a perfect mechanism by which to present the narrative that they're in charge when they're not really in charge. Okay, they're being played by other people, and the sad truth of the matter is that we have an alternative media space from both the left and the right, mostly from the left, and that's people like Bernard Moon of Alabama. Sadly, the Saker has fallen for this. Other people other people I consider friends, Garland Nixon and Pastor Deruta, and all of these people who I've been able to make contacts with on the left side of the fence, can't see the psyop, because they're leftists and because they're anti-corporatists and they're anti-imperialists in some ways. All they see is empire, and then they see things that support that, and then it becomes very easy for them to just go, see, it's capitalism's fault, it's crony corporatism, it's crony capitalism's fault, or whatever version of the word they want to use, and they can't go any farther than that. Okay, they can't take it any farther than that. They can't see, and this is why they're the ones that give me the biggest pushback, or just outright dismissal about the idea that there's a break at the top of the U.S. and European oligarchy, because there is. But it's over who's going to control this imperialist thing at the end of this, as opposed to, and that's the key to understanding the factionalization. This doesn't mean that all of them aren't agreed about destroying Russia, because they are clearly all in the tank for destroying Russia. But I do also believe that the Fed and the central banks, the Fed and the major commercial banks in the United States understand that destroying Russia means their destruction, because it empowers Europe in a way that is existential for them. And I think they still control a tremendous amount of power within the hierarchy, because the military-industrial complex is not the real movers and shakers. It is truly the banks, because without the banks buying the debt, you can't have, if without the banks and without the Fed, you don't have a military-industrial complex. You don't have spending. You don't have any of this stuff, and you don't have an offshore dollar market where you can use the offshore shadow banking system known as the Eurodollar system, in order to fund governments and takeovers and coups and all the rest of this stuff. So it really is about this. And I seeded this into the Twitter sphere last night, and I just asked simple questions, and now I'm looking at a massive response, which is a good thing. And people are calling me an idiot, and people are telling me I'm wrong, and blah, that's fine. But a lot of people are finally beginning to get it. And I think I might wind up with my first 1,000+ like tweet in 15 years of doing Twitter. This is how this is how bad I am at Twitter. But the funny part, and not that matters. I mean, it matters because thankfully, believe it or not, Twitter is one of the biggest generators of new members to this community. Like it or not, you guys in the audience may hate Twitter, but I got news for you. It's helping me curate like-minded folks into this space. And it's by far become the biggest source of traffic on the blog. It's also become the single biggest source of new people. And I haven't even gotten started on Twitter yet. So as big as this community is, and as powerful as it's becoming, understand that I still only have less than 22,000 people following me on Twitter. Imagine what that's going to look like at 150,000. Okay, so and at that point, I then have a responsibility to frame my discussions on Twitter in a different way. I have to actually change the way I do Twitter, because at that point, it's going to be, I'm going to have to be a little bit more engaged in a way that isn't, obnoxious and dismissive and, darkly humorous. Because with a bigger platform comes the responsibility of trying to actually, not just, frankly, shitpost. So to me, Davos is the one that benefits the most from this. Everybody benefits from this. Okay? I can look at I can create scenarios where each one of the factions that's fighting over the European energy market would benefit from this. We already went over the Americans. The Russians benefit from this by saying, okay, look, we're not sending any energy anymore to our hostile neighbors, and we want to see the destruction of the European Union, and we want to see the destruction of the NATO architecture, and we're going to make sure that you people can't heat your homes and feed yourself. When we go to war for real in Ukraine to take the territory we actually want, and to protect the Russian citizens that we want, which goes all the way to Odessa and north to Kharkov, then leave Kiev as a rump. And we'll just collapse our own pipeline. We've already made the money back on it. We'll just write it off, and then that will also further undermine the balance sheets of the companies that had to take a write down on on Nord Stream 2 in the first place, and the people who are still investors in Nord Stream 1. We can make life very difficult for all of you. And then, because we already have new customers lined up for the gas that we used to be sending to Europe, it'll also then allow Gazprom to do what they're doing in Ukraine, which is to, tell the Ukrainians, look, Moscow may take away may sanction you for being a hostile actor at this point. You send one more HIMARS into the newly annexed regions of the Donbass, and I got news for you. It's an act of war, and at that point, Gazprom can't pay you your transit fees. What are you going to do then? Because then we'll shut the gas off. And then all the gas to Europe stops, other than the people who are getting their gas through the Turk Stream pipeline. On the other side of it, I can see Davos wanting to continue to undermine the United States as in world politics by saying, look, we are, the United States is absolutely a terrorist nation. They are the new Nazi Germany, and they need to be brought to heel. Because how else are you going to get everybody? How else are you going to destroy the EU economically in 2022, 2023, and build it back by 2030 if you don't build an anti-American sentiment in Europe that rivals the current anti-Russian sentiment in Eastern Europe? So you've got anti-Russian sentiment in Eastern Europe. And now you're having growing anti-American sentiment all across Western Europe. That's the point. And if the United States runs around like Rambo without a jockstrap, to quote Jamie Lee Curtis from The Fish Called Wanda, doing terrible things, and who benefits from this? The people trying to maintain control, political, economic, and social control over Europe, while at the same time telling the rest of the world the U.S. is a terrorist state, and when you're done divesting yourselves of your dollar liabilities, don't ever do business with them again. And we'll have brought it on ourselves if we allow these neocons and these Straussians to go run around like freaking crazy men. And they're honestly so ideologically possessed. They're so focused on their goals. I mean, if you read up, Thierry Meissen over at VoltaireNet had a great article the other day about Leo Strauss and the Straussians. And if you don't think, when I think about this now, you don't think that Klaus Schwab and Soros and whatnot don't know how to make these, how to take these absolutists, and they are absolutists. They would rather burn the world down than lose. Right? That's their philosophy. If you don't think you can't manipulate those people into doing your bidding unwittingly, then you clearly don't understand their psychology. So, this is where we are. And this is what we're dealing with. So, who benefits the most from this is clearly Davos. The U.S. neocons benefit from it because now they get to continue to run their ridiculous energy policy and think they're winning by destroying Germany. This is the part you have to understand. Victoria Nuland's not that smart, folks. Okay? She's got about 105, 107 IQ. She's just smart enough to hate Russians and be belligerent. These are the exact kinds of people that you do not want running policy because they're just smart enough to think that they're in charge of things, but too stupid to see when they're being played. Okay? That's simple. So like I said, the Russians could benefit from this. But here's the one that's really interesting. I was talking with Marco over at Mittolcino yesterday, all day, about the last couple of days. He's called me 3 times from Switzerland over the last 2 days. It's been fascinating. And he sent me some stuff last night. You know who benefits the most from blowing up Nord Stream 1 and 2 from the neoconservative perspective? Is Italy. Because now, if the Russians turn off the last pipelines from Ukraine, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 can't be turned back on. Germany and most of Europe are screwed, right? Italy can get the gas pipelines from Libya turned back on, and you know how that happens? That happens if they make a deal with Putin and Erdogan over, basically getting a ceasefire called in the Libyan civil war, which for the most part has already happened. At the end of August, the fighting has stopped, and the Green Stream pipeline from Libya may wind up back online. And then there's also another pipeline. Marco was doing some calculations on how much gas Italy needs and how much gas could come into Italy from various sources. And there's a big pipeline that unfortunately is also, that in this case is partially owned by the Russians, coming into Italy, which he discounted completely in his calculations about how much gas Italy has coming in currently and how much they need. And if that one gets turned back online, guess who's the purveyor? Guess who's got the marginal therm of gas to distribute around Europe? It ain't the Germans anymore. I always said to you that Nord Stream 2 was a geopolitical tool for the Germans to control the energy supply around Europe. It was always the case. And it wasn't that it made them subservient to Russia. That was the wrong narrative. It was always about German mercantilist control. Okay? It wasn't about Europe's energy security vis-a-vis Russia. It was Europe's energy security vis-a-vis Germany. Okay? So, and this is what gives credence to the idea that France would actually invade northern Italy, which is also what Marco was worried about. And I'm not sure I believe this, but, you know, if the Italians turn around and say, okay, look, we have all the gas we need and y'all are starving, you know, is there going to be an internal war within Europe? It's a good question. Next thing to bring in about Davos. What does this do to the German economy? We already have Habeck this morning, the vice chancellor and energy minister in Germany, the crazy freaking green Habeck, saying, okay, we're going to have to let the nuke plants stay on for another few months because they have no hope of going back and getting. But who would bet? I mean, look, truthfully, if Germany is being isolated within the EU here, okay, look at what's happening here. Germany is being isolated within the EU. Who's doing that? Is it Biden? Does Biden really want that? Maybe. Does Davos want that? Not really. But at the same time, if Davos wants to bring all of Europe low and then build it back better, get it by now, their strategy clearly is now to destroy Europe as quickly as possible, go for political and economic control as quickly as possible, default on the debt, bring in the digital euro and MMT, issue perpetual debt, and then start the rebuilding process before everybody else collapses. Meanwhile, you turn around and you turn the United States into a vandal state and a terrorist state in the eyes of the world, so that when after the dollar bull market is finished, no one will ever want to do business with the United States again because we will have been turned into the real Fourth Reich in the minds of the rest of the world. Do you see the setup here? So how do you stop all this? Well, you stop all this by knowing full well that they're going to blow up the pipeline in Germany, and then you respond by opening up the taps back into Italy and fomenting a coup in Italy that gets rid of Mario Draghi, puts the Brothers of Italy in charge, backs them in their negotiations now with Brussels over Italy's place within the European Union. Because if Italy has all the gas they need and everybody else is starving, guess what? Italy wins all negotiations. We don't have a replay of 2015 where Syriza went to Merkel and begged and then eventually, rolled over and sacrificed the Greeks. We have the exact opposite. We have Meloni going to Habeck and von der Leyen and bitch slapping her and saying, no, excuse me, Italy's in charge. You guys need our gas. So if you don't tell us a story that we like really, really well, guess what? We leave. Because I'll be popular being able to, while everybody else on the continent is starving and the Italians have all the gas they need to get through the winter and next year. I'm out projecting 12 months out now, guys. Then she'll be so popular it won't be funny. She'll be able to go for snap elections within a year and get a 60% majority, and then just waltz her ass right, and then just waltz the Italians right out of the European Union, doing the bidding of whom? JP Morgan, the Federal Reserve, Goldman, Citigroup, the ones trying to save the United States from Davos by breaking the European Union apart. Everybody has half the story now, but they have the wrong reasons why the U.S. is trying to break the European Union. It is not to just break Germany and turn it into a vassal state. It is to break the European Union so that we do not have global communism and the destruction of all that is good and decent in this world. And maybe we can start to bring back rational commercial banking after all these globalists have been destroyed and these Marxists have been destroyed. I'm not saying it's all going to work, folks, but I can see it playing out this way. I've been thinking about this nonstop for the last 24 hours. And it's very clear that Nord Stream 2 is, the Nord Stream bombings We have crossed a significant threshold. And I don't know who did this, but I have my thinking cap on. And I have my preferred scenarios. And I've thought through how it could not be Davos. And every one of those arguments just come up weaker. Not implausible, weaker. Okay? So I'm still willing to be contradicted on this. I'm still willing to be open-minded about this. But I think it's far deeper than this. Because somebody on one of our people on the Slack server this morning related a discussion about he had with a friend of his who's former US spec ops. And he said, that guy said, no way would the United States just bomb this thing and make it so freaking public that it would show up on seismographs. They would wait, or we would do it in such a way that there would be absolute plausible deniability, and it would, show up in different ways. It would never, ever, ever look this way. So the whole thing just looks like a frame job. We put the right ship in the area, and then 2 days later it blows up. And then everybody who's an armchair geopolitician, geopolitical expert now, puts all of these the circumstantial evidence together, and we get and then we get our typical George Webb video. George Webb's the next guy on my friggin' list of people to target. That guy is so full of shit, it's coming out of his ass. It's coming out of his eyeballs. Like, I'm sorry. I'm done with George Webb. Like, I'm listening to the stuff that's coming out of his mouth now about Ukraine, and I'm like, oh my God, dude, who are you carrying water for? I gave up on that guy ages ago. He mostly just does what I do, and then goes finds a couple of headlines that mostly fit his thesis, and then he backfits, and then but he puts out so much shit on a regular basis that God forbid you can never call him on anything. Like, it's just ridiculous. There's nothing. It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry, and Whitney's learned the same damn thing, and it's not pathetic. It's just sad because it's not investigative journalism to connect dots. It's not. That's not investigative journalism. Because these people are spoon-fed information they think is real. See, the reason why I'm convinced about a lot of this stuff is that, unlike myself, I stick with mostly mainstream sources, top-level sources. Dexter, on the other hand, is very active on Poll and on 4chan and 8chan. And he's very, very good at figuring out what the chatter looks like and who's behind the chatter. And I can tell you that his analysis of 4chan and of Poll's traffic over the last few weeks, has been, he's like, something's different. Something's really off. And I don't want to go into details about this because clearly the last thing I want to do is start, going into certain areas of the discussion that will get us into trouble. Okay? But let's just say that, there's a certain intelligence agency I haven't mentioned recently that is the source of at least 25% to 30% of the chatter on Poll anymore. And that you have to bracket for everything that you see on Poll that then winds up on Twitter came from them. And now think to yourself for just a moment where they benefit and how they fit into all this and how deeply involved they are at every level of all of these things. So, all right. If we lose subtitles, it's because I cannot, I'm doing my best because unfortunately the subtitles are they're connected to the internet. Like Microsoft can't even run a subtitles program without having it go through their big data server so that they can monitor what I'm doing. Retards. All right. Let's talk about Xi being missing for a couple minutes before I go on to the charts. So the rumors about Xi, Chairman Xi Jinping, are interesting. We are on the edge of the new party Congress, and the rumors coming out are likely that he's been overthrown. It's likely nonsense. It's possible that he does not get a third term. and that's what this is about, and that the Politburo is, wagging fingers at each other and screaming at each other at a resort somewhere, and that Xi may wind up not being premier after the next Party Congress, because a third term as chairman of the Party Congress of the CCP is very rare. So I want to put it out there. Okay. Dexter and I talked about this a couple days ago. I haven't really had a chance to update it yet. But the longer that it goes on that Xi is missing, and I use that term loosely, basically out of the public eye, the more it lends credence to that as we move closer to the Party Congress. So let's just keep that in mind. That doesn't mean that Russia and China's relationship is going to be in trouble. It doesn't mean anything beyond the fact that Xi has pissed off a lot of people. And if hardliners take control in China, then the game board changes again. The neocons keep thinking they want to get rid of Putin. The last thing they want is for any of the people who are behind Putin to take power. The same thing may be the case with Xi. And frankly, if there's an internal thing happening within the Politburo, this is, how much influence, outsiders like Soros and company have on trying to get him from, keep him from getting elected to a third term is anybody's guess. It's certainly not something I'm going to speculate on. It's just something for you guys to think about. All right, I was asked, the only thing I have in the Patreon Ask book really this morning that's of note is the discussion about Australia. I'll get to that when I get to the charts. So let's go through the charts real quick because a lot of them aren't really all that interesting relative to Sunday, and then we'll get you out of here. All right, so gold is continuing to show weakness here. I wanted to, on Sunday I backed out to show you the 3-year chart on a weekly basis in gold, just to give you an idea of where it is, where we are. The monthly chart doesn't really show it as well, as clearly as the weekly chart does. We have support now in the 1570, 1580 area, okay? And that's likely where we're headed. And whether we're going to get that in the next couple of weeks as an emotional spasm and then a reversal is anybody's guess. But 1550 to 1570 is definitely incoming. Dollars are just... everybody's using the gold market as a dollar piggy bank. Now, watching the positioning on the COMEX and watching the vault numbers on both gold and silver, there is also a valuable thing to do. All right, because if they get drained, then those markets go zero bid. Then we're into a physical market, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Okay. Silver. We had the 2-bar reversal. I warned you on Sunday that we were in the potential of back-to-back 2-bar reversals here. And if we wind up with back-to-back 2-bar reversals, that means that $18 may not hold. Okay? And that there may be, $15.50 on the downside. Again, the premiums in the silver physical market are so high that this is just a ludicrous number. Okay? And it's just people using it as a source. They're just trading thin markets, trying to create, trying to make money for themselves. One, and two, to push a narrative. Okay, this would be a very bearish reversal if this does not reverse itself by the end of the week. Bitcoin, we avoided just barely a 2-bar reversal of this 1-bar reversal on last week, and we've got low volatility and an inside bar. Well, maybe not an inside bar, but low volatility this week. Volatility continues to be extremely low in Bitcoin. So, these markets are getting stretched to the downside as far as they can go. And if this area breaks, we're going to 11,000 on Bitcoin. But at the same time, if we're talking about that, then we're talking about global war and the euro at 85 cents and gold at 1,400 and the Dow at 18,000 or something crazy. I just don't see that happening. I see a lot of people realizing that they are mispositioned in a lot of assets, and everybody's using, assets that correlate directly to dollars as a piggy bank, and they're going to continue to use that as a piggy bank until there is a critical mass shift that even the dollar is not a safe haven. Okay. Australia. So I was asked by one of our more active members to talk about Australia. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Australian dollar, because he asked about that. And let's start with the Australian dollar. And I'm going to go to the Australian stock index in a minute. In order to even talk about the Australian dollar, I had to go and grab 15 years worth of data and construct a quarterly chart this morning. So I didn't have this chart this morning, so y'all are welcome. No one's seen, I don't think anybody's seen a quarterly chart of the Australian dollar in candlestick form in quite a long time. So, because you can't even get this on investing.com or other, you have to literally build these charts by hand, which is fine. I have no problem doing it. It takes me about 10 minutes. The thing I want to note here, okay, the Australian dollar has been in a bear market relative to the dollar since the peak of the gold market in 2011. Makes sense. Commodities have been in a bear. Commodities were in a bear market up until the end of the Corona apocalypse, and the Australian dollar is nominally a commodity-backed currency, right? Because most of its exports are raw commodities. It is one of the, it's like the Mexican peso and the Russian ruble and the Canadian dollar. These are all considered commodity currencies. So. And I'm not an expert on Australian politics, but I can tell you that it's clear that Australia's political scenario is very much a Davos controlled thing. We saw it during COVID. Their extreme levels of lockdown, along with Jacinda Ardern over in New Zealand, and to a lesser extent Justin Trudeau over in Canada, tells you that there was a sincere push by the Commonwealth nations to, implement this plan, and as a test bed to see what people would be willing to put up with. And so they tried the most draconian in, places like New Zealand and Australia. They were slightly less draconian over in Canada. They were, so. This breakdown below the green line this quarter is your clear worry. The Corona apocalypse created a quarterly close at around 62 cents. We're trading at about 67 cents this morning. But if you go back all the way, and I went as far back as I really could to get data, even the depths of the 2008 financial crisis didn't see a quarterly close at these levels. Okay? So this is telling you two things. One, it's not telling you that Australia is, as a commodity currency, is failing. It's telling you that as a commodity currency, its exports are, that it is now in more serious trouble because of housing and or other capital outflows. Because as well, remember that Australia was a destination for Chinese capital during this period post Lehman Brothers. And so that capital has been fleeing. Now we have it's fled out. We now have a bottoming pattern here that has broken down. So the Australian dollar is likely going to go back to 50 cents. And because it's just that we've not seen the dollar this strong in quite a long time. And, there's a lot of malinvestment in Australia's economy that was built on access to cheap credit. Just that simple. And Chinese capital inflow. And guess what? The Australians have declared themselves, in effect, an enemy of China. So the Chinese are going to pull all their money out. And they're just starting to do so. The whole Pacific Rim is going to pull away from the Western financial space. Okay. So looking at that way, let's look at the ASX 50, which is basically the Australian version of the Dow, for lack of a better term. And it's clear that, earlier this year, while the Fed was, playing coy about raising interest rates, we got a double top in the Australian market, similar to what we got in the Dow, by the way. And now we're locked in a brutal downtrend. So we had a downtrend, 2-bar reversal here, double top, which fails, we get, this is effectively a 3-bar reversal, but what it amounts to is a collapse to new lows closing below this low, which is just bad. And then no even attempt to break above this bar, and now we've just taken these 2 bars out, and now we're breaking longer term support. Because now the low here is nominally the support, the emotional low from 3 months ago, and now we go back and look at the chart, and we say, yep, a close below this low here, it means that we're going back to first to 6,000, and you can clearly see some support and whatnot between 6,300 and 6,000, and then back to about 5,600 where all these lows, 5,500, 5,600 where all these lows are. So at some point, the dollar's going to get too strong. It may not be for a year or two. When it does, the Australian dollar is going to be unbelievably cheap, and the Australian stock market will also likely be unbelievably cheap. With failing U.S. influence in Oceania or Southeast Asia, and capital beginning to, once that capital begins to flow out of the U.S. in, say, 2024, 2025, right, after a too strong dollar crushes the American economy, then you're looking at an opportunity. You're probably looking at a very strong opportunity for the Australians to realign themselves. And I would fully expect by that point Davos to be completely done and dusted. Jacinda Ardern is in trouble for next year's elections over in New Zealand. Expect the same thing over in Australia. And we're going to see a decided shift, quote unquote, right, but not really, because both of these are effectively fascist governments with a leftist veneer on them. So we're going to see a nominal populist movement, I think, show up even in Australia, because at some point, everything, like the Commonwealth is going to break apart here. The Brits are in the process of being torn apart by internal traders, the same way that the United States, they're trying to tear the United States apart. The U.S. is tugging on one side, Europe is tugging on the other, and the U.K. is, and they're trying to pull the U.K. apart. Is Liz Truss a strong enough leader to, figure out which side is best for the U.K.? Can they chart an independent path? I don't think so. I think that job was supposed to fall to Nigel Farage, but he wasn't. But he's not strong enough a person to do it either. So does Australia, and I don't know the answer. I'm asking questions because I don't know. Does Australia have somebody coming up within the ranks politically to change the country's course and realize that their best bet is not with AUKUS, but with the global south? And does that occur after the worst of the war period that we're probably moving into? I would not be investing in Australia until after I see at least some kind of emotional bottom in the currency, and I see some kind of support show up long term in the chart, the stock chart. But at that point, and it's going to be a political shift, that will probably be the marker. And then with a 6 to 9 month timeline. Okay. Is the ECB losing control, or are they setting up Italy for a crash? It's a good question, but I can tell you that, remember, the whole purpose of looking at German-Italian bond spreads is to see how effective Christine Lagarde at the ECB is with her new program, the TPI, to maintain control. So she announced this on July 28th, and the spread was 2.45%, and they were worried about it. Just getting the markets, just manipulating the headlines and having the ECB make that big announcement was able to crush, the spread back down towards 2%. Momentum monkeys are in there front running the ECB, trying to pick up nickels in front of a freight train. This is that alone, along with any interventions by the ECB, would see this. You'd see this for a couple of weeks. Then after that, then the big question happens. Remember, this is a daily chart. Then after that, you get a couple of a few weeks of Lagarde sitting on the spread as tightly as possible. Then the Italian elections happen, and now they start trying to punish Italy by allowing the spread to widen? Is it her losing control over the spread, or did she do it purposefully by not intervening anymore in the Italian bond markets as a threat to Giorgia Meloni? Don't think that you're going to get out of line, or we'll just pull all our financial support. The problem with that is, if she does that, the ECB goes freaking bankrupt. And that's the bluff. It's all bluff. Lagarde has nothing but bluffs. That's all she's got. And she doesn't carry the weight that Draghi did. She doesn't have anything. What she has is neck scarves and French arrogance. That'll get you far in European politics. But only so far. So we're going to watch this carefully, because this could continue to widen. And the more they allow it to widen, or it just widens on its own, again, we don't know what the situation is. It could be either they've lost control of the bond markets, or they're trying to set Italy up. If you see this trade sideways for a few days, you know that Lagarde is trying to hold it back and allow it to rise in a stepwise manner. If it just goes straight up, then Lagarde is clearly trying to blackmail the Italians. Okay? And the reason for that is that they'll try to, when Meloni and company go to Mattarella, the president, to say this is the government we want, and Mattarella is then going to insert himself illegally into the process and try and push Mario Draghi back into the situation. That's what he's going to try and do. Just wait. It's coming. As finance minister or something like that. Same way he had gotten himself involved in the last government formation back in 2018. If Meloni is smart, and she's, by all reckoning, she's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but she is passionate. So if she has moderating influences on either side of her, she might be able to get through this. But it's going to be difficult. Okay? We'll see. But Davos is seriously not going to let this go without a fight. Overseas dollar markets. So I find it interesting that we've already gotten a big move on the SOFR versus LIBOR spread in the days after the Fed rate hike. It is the sharpest move higher in those intervening days. If you look in times past, it's always not done anything. Now they're having to move. Why? Because they sat on it before the rate hike, and now they've got to play catch up. The U.S. dollar index is 114 and rising. I didn't update the euro, but the euro is trading about 96 cents this morning. The euro dollar futures inversion is back to the Fed will pivot in March at 4.75% versus pivoting in June at 5%. Again, mostly I think this is just kind of short covering and kind of dead cat bouncing around as people try to, find dollars and in this position in this market. I don't think it's indicative of a trend change. The other side of the U.S. German 10-year spread issue is that the U.S. Italian spread is now up to 90 basis points. So I want you to look at this as well. The U.S. German 10-year spread peaked the other day on the Italian elections at 1.8%. Lagarde was clearly in the market she was allowing Italy's debt to rise while she was buying German debt to widen the spreads, and now that's collapsed. So she's playing this game again. And note that she wasn't even able to get it to the last high, so we now have a clear downtrend in this from 2.1% to 1.97% to 1.84%, and the floor is 1.6% as always, and they're going to try and she'll try and hold that until she can. Okay. The dollar is crushing the Chinese yuan. But again, I've told you that I expected the yuan to loosen, to weaken, because the Chinese were loosening monetary policy while everybody else was strengthening in order to deal with their property market implosions. And internally, they have to liquefy markets domestically. All right. The yen, the intervention so far by the Bank of Japan have been, I would say, they're with mixed results. And I know there's There's some Japanese members of the Japanese focused members of the community who have argued very strongly that Japan has this all under control. I remain unconvinced, but I also don't discount those arguments, and I understand what they are. I can't go into detail here. I don't have time or the inclination. I'd have to devote an entire market report to explaining this. But just honestly look at, as we get towards the 145 to 150 area on the yen, the Bank of Japan should make substantive moves to defend it and strengthen Japan's position overall. That's the argument. I'm not sure how they do it. I've heard the arguments. I just remain unconvinced, but that's fine. I'm not right about everything. And Japan is not a market I have a lot of deep knowledge of. I have some knowledge of. So I'm willing to be persuaded, and I'm willing to be argued with. And that's a direct shout out to the person who's been making these arguments on Slack. I continue to be listening with very attentively. All right. So there's that. The ruble is back into is holding 58. The price of oil is holding in. Brent is holding around $85 a barrel. The oh my God global depression scenario is holding everybody hostage still. It's also a good source of dollars in the piggy bank. And volatility is always Davos's friend. So Russia came out the other day and advised OPEC Plus to cut production by 1 million barrels a day. They're the quotas. It's not really hard since they're going to be short by 2.3 million barrels a day next year anyway, and they're probably not even going to reach they're not reaching their quotas now, and they're not going to reach them next year. It's just a headline to support the price of oil. So reality is that oil's going higher from here because supply and demand mismatch next year is off the charts. And shipping and logistics seem to be, in my mind, still seem to be one of the best opportunities in the markets today. All right, let's get on to the Dow to show you what I think is happening here. So the Dow is continuing to show weakness, just like gold. And again, we haven't had an emotional bottom yet. And because we haven't had an emotional crescendo, we haven't found the bottom yet. There's still room to the downside on the Dow. Likely we're going to hit, since we've broken through this low here from June, we're likely headed to 27. The Fed does not care if we lose another 5 to 7, 8% off the market. Their goals are much bigger than that. And look, the reality is that either asset prices have to drop by see, this is one of the things I need to explain to everyone. Just to remind everybody. Inflation and deflation are two sides of the same coin. And in a scenario like this, where there's no ability to take on more debt, last point before we leave today, we're going to have to balance the books. But the balancing of the books can happen, it's functional. It can happen anywhere along, a line, between the fall in asset prices and the rise in the price of gold. We can either keep asset prices exactly where they are, but then we would have to allow gold to rise to an insane level to balance the books at the current prices. Or we could allow asset prices to drop to meet the current price of gold, or even lower. Or we could meet in the middle. See, everybody calling for 90%, for $50,000 gold and for a 95% drop in the price of the Dow are both equally full of shit, to put it bluntly. Because it's a linear projection of a negotiation. The more likely scenario is that we're going to get 40 to 50% contraction in credit markets and a 5 to 7x rise in the price of gold, as opposed to a 50x rise in the price of gold. Okay? That is actually the least damaging scenario, because the books have to be balanced. And if we're smart, if we're smart, we'll play it in those ways. Now, we were 36,000 or almost 37,000 on the Dow. We've lost 8,000 points or 7,000 points, 8,000 points on 36,000. So the Dow is down 20, just around 25%. Is that a panic move? Or are we halfway to the bottom of the bear market? And is it even going to be a bear market if the DAX goes to 6,000 from the current 12, or the FTSE drops by half down into the threes, or the Australian market drops from 6,000, 6,500 down to 3,500? We've already had a 50% correction in the price of Chinese equities. At some point, people are going to start plowing into Chinese equities. Especially with the weaker yen or weaker yuan. And the same thing's going to happen to the Japanese market. So you can, I'm talking to, the patron who's been arguing for, Japan muddling through. They're coming out the other side in good shape. So, nothing to be scared of here. It's a bear market, at least for now. Will we get a massive bull run in the Dow as Europe collapses in a disorderly manner? Yes. Will it be short-lived? Yes. Will it just get us back to 39,000? Possibly. And then will it collapse again after that? Possibly. Will we be range bound for the next 10 years in the Dow between 27 on the downside and 35 on the upside? Very possible. Or will we see a blow off top at 45 grand and then a collapse back into the 30s? Again, all of these scenarios are possible. But think about the way you balance the books, because it's just math. Okay? I'm guiding us through on a 50% collapse in asset prices and a 5 to 7 to 10x rise in the price of gold. That's what I'm thinking. That's the one I think that leaves the most people who deserve to be punished moved out of the market, and the least amount of damage globally to the global economy beyond what's already been done. All right? That's what I have for you this morning. Like I said, I may be offline for a couple of days starting tomorrow or Friday. If I am, again, it's not about my secret portfolio of pictures of Hillary Clinton. So you guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.